It started in a Brooklyn alleyway where a maid found a dying man bleeding into the storm drains. Driven by nothing but desperate compassion, she dragged him into her illegal basement apartment, risking everything to save a stranger's life. By morning, he was alive. But she was fired for a theft she never committed, stripped of her only income and facing deportation. Yet, silence doesn't last forever, especially when a man she rescued was no ordinary stranger. And what he did in return would shake the foundations of New York's elite. What would you have done that night? And if you are ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where in the world you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The nor'easter that slammed into Brooklyn that October night carried the kind of cold that bit through wool and bone alike. Dorothy Mueller kept her head down as she hurried through the flooded streets, her thin coat doing little against the wind that howled between the brownstones like a living thing. At 23 years old, she carried herself with the cautious posture of someone who had learned to stay invisible. Small-framed with dark, exhausted eyes and work-roughened hands, she moved quickly through the darkened alley behind the brownstone where she rented her illegal basement room. The storm had turned the alley into a river of trash and ice-cold water. Dorothy's shoes were already soaked through, her fingers numb as she fumbled for her keys. Then she saw him. A man collapsed against her fire escape door. Expensive dark suit soaked through with rain, and something darker, blood. Lots of it. His face, partially hidden by wet black hair, was pale in the intermittent lightning flashes. Strong features, a sharp jaw, a face that, even unconscious, carried an authority that made her breath catch. A gold watch on his wrist. Custom Italian shoes. And a gunshot wound blooming red across his white shirt. Dorothy's pulse hammered. Every instinct screamed to walk away, to call the police, to do anything but get involved. But the man's chest still rose and fell, shallow and desperate. And Dorothy Mueller, despite her fear and poverty and illegal status, could not leave another human being to die in the freezing rain. She grabbed him under the arms and pulled. Dorothy's basement apartment was barely large enough to be called a room. A narrow cot against one wall, a hot plate and mini fridge in the corner, a single bare bulb hanging from a wire overhead. The concrete walls wept with condensation, and the ceiling pipes groaned every time someone upstairs flushed a toilet. It was illegal, unsafe, and all she could afford. She dragged the man inside and locked the door behind her, heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Water pooled around them on the cracked linoleum. His blood mixed with the rainwater, spreading in thin red ribbons toward the drain in the corner. Dorothy pressed shaking hands against the wound in his side, feeling the warm pulse of blood against her palms. She had no medical training, only the basic first aid she'd learned from YouTube videos on the library computer. Her hands moved on instinct. Towels from her laundry pile. Pressure. More towels. She boiled water on the hot plate with trembling fingers, sterilized a sewing needle in the flame, and began to stitch. Every sound from the hallway above made her freeze. Mrs. Chen's television. Mr. Davidov's heavy footsteps. The building super's keys jangling past her door. Any one of them could hear. Any one of them could call the police. The man's face, even unconscious, carried a severity that made her stomach twist. Sharp cheekbones. A Roman nose that had been broken at least once. A thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His hands, when she cleaned them, were calloused but manicured, the hands of someone who knew violence but moved in circles of wealth. The suit, now ruined and bloody, had a label she recognized from her work at the estate. Brioni. Thousands of dollars. The watch on his wrist could probably pay her rent for a year. She worked through the night, changing bandages, checking his temperature, praying he wouldn't die in her basement, and praying even harder that he wouldn't wake up and kill her. He woke on the third morning. Dorothy was heating soup on the hot plate when she heard him shift on the cot. She turned slowly, soup ladle still in her hand like a useless weapon. His eyes were open,
Gray.
cold as winter steel. They tracked her movement with predatory precision, taking in the cramped room, the locked door, her frightened face. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, damaged by pain and dehydration, but it carried an authority that filled the tiny space. "Brooklyn," Dorothy whispered. "My apartment. You were shot. I couldn't just leave you." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes stripping away every defense she had. Then he lifted one hand, slowly, deliberately, and pressed a finger to his lips. Silence. She nodded, throat tight. He pointed to himself, shook his head. No name. No questions. Then he pointed to her and made a simple gesture with his hand, a promise. A debt owed. For 11 days, Dorothy lived in terror. She went to work at the estate each morning at 5, scrubbing floors and polishing silver under the watchful, hostile gaze of Mrs. Veronica Sterling, the head housekeeper who seemed to take personal pleasure in finding fault with Dorothy's work. She returned each night to find him stronger, sitting up, watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. She cooked for him simple meals of rice, eggs, canned soup, and he ate without complaint. He never spoke unless necessary, never asked her name, never explained who he was or why someone had put a bullet in him. But Dorothy knew. She'd seen enough crime dramas, heard enough whispered gossip in the estate kitchens. This was not a businessman. This was not someone who went to the police when trouble found him. This was someone the police looked for. If you can't stand people like Veronica Sterling, who prey on the poor and helpless, comment, "I stand for justice now." Veronica Sterling had the kind of beauty that had curdled with age and resentment. 52 years old, impeccably dressed in tailored black suits, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She ruled the estate's household staff with the vindictive precision of someone who had clawed her way to a small throne and would die before surrendering it. And she had noticed Dorothy. "You look terrible," Veronica said one morning, her voice dripping false concern as Dorothy polished the grand staircase banister. "Are you ill? We can't have sick girls spreading germs through the house." Dorothy kept her eyes down.
No, ma'am.
"Just tired." Tired. Veronica circled her like a predator. "You've been tired for 2 weeks. And what's that on your hand?" Dorothy's breath caught. A small burn from the hot plate, barely visible. "Nothing, ma'am."
Cooking accident.
Veronica's smile was razor-thin. "Cooking. In that rat hole you rent." She leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. "You know, Dorothy, I've been wondering about you. Coming in exhausted. Those shadows under your eyes. The way you jump at every sound." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing, ma'am. Nothing." Veronica straightened, smoothing her jacket. "We'll see about that. I have my eye on you, girl. One mistake. That's all I need." Dorothy scrubbed harder, knuckles white on the polishing cloth. She could feel Veronica's hatred like heat against her back. It wasn't personal, or rather, it was entirely personal in the way that cruelty toward the powerless always was. Dorothy was young, hardworking, and utterly defenseless. The perfect target. The harassment escalated daily. Veronica inspected Dorothy's work with magnifying glass intensity, finding fault in invisible dust, imaginary streaks on windows. She assigned Dorothy the heaviest tasks, moving furniture alone, scrubbing the basement stairs, cleaning the estate owner's private bathroom with its gold fixtures that showed every fingerprint. She made Dorothy redo completed work, then wrote her up for being behind schedule. Through it all, Dorothy said nothing. She couldn't afford to fight back. She couldn't afford to lose this job. On the 12th night, Dorothy returned to her basement to find the cot empty. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he collapsed? Been discovered? Then she saw it. The small folding table, where she'd served him countless meals of humble food, now held a single object. A silver ring, heavy and unmarked, catching the light from the bare bulb overhead. No note.
No explanation.
He was gone as silently as a ghost dispersing in fog. Dorothy picked up the ring with trembling fingers. It was warm, as though recently worn. She turned it over, searching for markings, initials, anything. Nothing. Just smooth, expensive silver and the weight of an unspoken promise. She slipped it onto her thumb, the only finger it would fit, and felt the strange comfort of it against her skin. Whatever debt he believed he owed, this was his payment. A cryptic token from a dangerous man whose name she still didn't know. Outside, the November fog pressed against her single basement window like a living thing, and somewhere in that gray darkness, a phantom walked free. Don't let the Veronicas of the world win. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters and petty manipulators won't subscribe. The brooch was Victorian, all delicate gold filigree and tiny seed pearls arranged in the shape of a bird in flight. Mrs. Ashford, the estate owner's elderly mother, kept it in a velvet-lined box on her dresser alongside her other heirlooms. Dorothy had dusted around it 100 times, never once touching it directly, always careful to use her cloth on the box's exterior only. She should have known Veronica would never let her suspicions rest. It happened on a gray Tuesday morning in the grand foyer. Dorothy was on her hands and knees scrubbing the marble floor when Veronica's voice cut through the quiet like breaking glass. "Everyone, come here at once." The other staff members emerged from various rooms, Maria from the kitchen, old Thomas from the garden entrance, young Claire from upstairs. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford descended the staircase, confusion creasing their wealthy, unbothered faces. Veronica stood beside Dorothy's cleaning caddy, her expression a mask of theatrical shock and righteous fury. In her manicured hand, she held the bird brooch, dangling it like evidence at a trial. "I found this," Veronica announced, voice trembling with false emotion, hidden at the bottom of Dorothy's supplies. Wrapped in a cleaning rag. She turned to Mrs. Ashford with practiced sympathy. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I know how much this piece means to you. Your grandmother's brooch." The room went deathly silent. Dorothy's stomach dropped through the floor.
No.
"No, I didn't." "You didn't what?" Veronica's eyes gleamed with victory. "Didn't steal a priceless family heirloom? Then how did it get into your caddy, Dorothy? Did it walk there by itself?" "I would never." Dorothy's voice cracked. She looked at Mrs. Ashford, at Mr. Ashford's hardening expression, at the other staff members already stepping away from her as though poverty and desperation were contagious. "Please, I clean that room every day. I never touched it, I swear." "Enough." Mr. Ashford's voice was ice. "Veronica, call the police."
No.
Dorothy scrambled to her feet, panic flooding her veins. Please listen to me. I didn't take anything. I would never." "Security." Mrs. Ashford's voice was shrill with violated trust. "Get her out of my house." Thomas, apologetic but firm, took Dorothy's arm. Veronica was already on her phone, her voice syrupy with false regret as she reported the theft. The other maids wouldn't meet Dorothy's eyes. Claire actually looked sorry, but she said nothing. No one ever did. They searched her, emptied her pockets, her bag, even made her remove her shoes. Found nothing else, of course, because there was nothing else to find. The ring on her thumb, Jason's ring, they dismissed as cheap costume jewelry, not even worth confiscating. Mr. Ashford handed her a final check with her wages minus restitution costs that left her with almost nothing. "You're terminated effective immediately. Consider yourself fortunate we're not pressing charges yet. If that brooch shows any damage, we'll be contacting the district attorney." Dorothy stood on the sidewalk outside the estate gates 40 minutes later, her small bag of personal items clutched in shaking hands. No job.
No references.
No way to pay rent. The building super had made it clear, one missed payment, and he'd report her illegal occupancy to the city. She was ruined. Jason Watkins sat behind a mahogany desk in his penthouse office overlooking the East River, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind him like a crown of diamonds and steel. The bullet wound in his side had healed to a manageable ache, barely noticeable beneath his custom suit. His return to power had been swift and absolute. Rivals who'd thought him dead learned otherwise in permanent ways. He'd been back in control for 3 weeks when Marcus entered without knocking, tablet in hand. Marcus Chun, his head of security and information, only interrupted with that particular expression when something required immediate attention. "We have a problem," Marcus said, setting the tablet on Jason's desk.
Dorothy Mueller.
The girl from Brooklyn. Jason's gray eyes lifted sharply. He'd thought about her more than he cared to admit. The small, terrified woman who'd stitched him back together with shaking hands and fed him soup like he was human instead of the thing people called the Phantom. He'd left her the ring, a key to resources if she ever needed them, and assumed she'd live her quiet life in peace. What about her? Marcus pulled up a file. Fired 2 days ago from her position at the Ashford estate. Accused of theft. They're considering pressing charges. She's been blacklisted from every domestic agency in the city. He swiped to another screen. She's about to be evicted from her apartment. Current legal status is undocumented, which means deportation. Jason's voice went flat. Yes, sir. Jason took the tablet, scanning the report with predatory focus. His people were thorough. They'd compiled everything. Employment records. The frame-up. Security footage timestamps that proved Dorothy was nowhere near the estate owner's room when the brooch disappeared. And there, at the center of it all, was a name and face that made Jason's jaw tighten. Mrs. Veronica Sterling, head housekeeper. The report included her history. Petty cruelties documented by former staff, several suspicious thefts attributed to maids she disliked, all of whom had been fired and disappeared into poverty. A pattern of predatory behavior aimed at the most vulnerable. "Show me everything on Sterling," Jason said quietly. Marcus knew that tone. He'd heard it right before Jason ordered someone erased from existence. Already compiled. She has a mortgage she can't afford, a gambling problem she thinks is secret, and a reputation in the domestic service community as a tyrant. Jason set down the tablet and stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city moved in its endless rhythm, millions of lives intersecting, colliding, most of them unaware that men like him existed in the spaces between law and chaos. He'd built an empire on violence and fear, but he'd also built it on something his father had beaten into him from childhood. Debts must be paid. Always. Dorothy Mueller had saved his life when she had every reason to let him die. She'd risked everything, her safety, her freedom, her future, for a stranger bleeding in an alley. And this is what the world had given her in return. Humiliation.
Destruction.
Injustice delivered by a petty tyrant who preyed on those too powerless to fight back. Jason's reflection in the window was stone. Get me everything on the Ashfords. Business dealings, legal exposure, secrets. I want leverage. And Sterling. I'll handle her personally. Jason turned, and Marcus took an involuntary step back from what he saw in those gray eyes. Not anger. Something colder. A debt of life must be repaid, Marcus. And injustice must be punished. Marcus nodded and left. Jason returned to his desk and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a photograph his people had taken. Dorothy leaving the estate, small and defeated, clutching a bag of her belongings. Her face was barely visible, but he could see the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like someone trying not to break apart in public.
He would make this right.
The Phantom always kept his debts. The message arrived at the Ashford estate at precisely 8 in the morning, delivered by a courier in an unmarked black car. A single envelope, heavy cream paper, sealed with unmarked wax. Inside, embossed letterhead with no company name, just an address in Lower Manhattan that anyone with sense would recognize as belonging to the Watkins family. The text was brief. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, your presence is required at a private meeting today at 2 p.m. regarding the termination of Dorothy Mueller. Attendance is mandatory. Come alone with Mrs. Sterling and your legal counsel. The matter is time-sensitive.
JW. No signature. No explanation.
No option to decline. Richard Ashford's hands trembled as he read it. His wife, Margaret, went pale. They knew exactly who JW was. Everyone in New York's elite circles knew, even if they pretended not to. Jason Watkins. The Phantom. The man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and back rooms, whose influence reached from the docks to City Hall, whose enemies had a habit of disappearing or suffering sudden, catastrophic reversals of fortune. Why would Jason Watkins care about a maid? Margaret whispered. Richard had no answer. But they would attend. No one refused the Phantom. At 1:55 p.m., 3 black Cadillac Escalades turned onto the tree-lined street of the Upper East Side estate. Armored. Tinted windows, so dark they looked like rolling voids. They moved with the synchronized precision of a military convoy, parking in a formation that blocked both exits from the circular driveway. The Ashfords watched from their drawing room window. Veronica Sterling stood behind them, her face drained of color, hands clutching her purse like a shield. Their lawyer, Bernard Walsh, adjusted his tie nervously and checked his briefcase for the 3rd time. The center vehicle's rear door opened. Jason Watkins emerged in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his movements economical and precise. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair perfectly styled, his gray eyes hidden behind expensive sunglasses. 4 men in dark suits flanked him. Not bodyguards, but something more dangerous. Soldiers. He removed his sunglasses as he approached the entrance, and the Ashfords both instinctively stepped back from the window. The butler opened the door before Jason could knock, his hand shaking on the brass handle. Jason walked into the marble foyer like he owned it, his presence filling the space with an authority that made the estate's opulence look cheap by comparison. His men remained outside, visible through the windows, a constant reminder of the power that had just entered their world. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, Jason said, his voice quiet and controlled. Thank you for seeing me. It wasn't a thank you. It was a statement of inevitability. The Ashfords descended the staircase, Bernard close behind. Veronica followed last, trying to maintain her imperious posture but failing, her steps hesitant, her face a mask of barely suppressed panic. Jason's gray eyes tracked her movement with the dispassionate focus of a predator identifying prey. Shall we? He gestured toward the drawing room, taking control of the meeting before it had even begun. They followed him into their own home, and every single one of them knew nothing would ever be the same. Do you believe in second chances for those who are unfairly targeted? Hit subscribe to affirm that kindness will always overcome evil and greed. The drawing room felt smaller with Jason Watkins in it. He stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, while the Ashfords sat rigidly on their antique sofa. Bernard perched on a chair, briefcase unopened on his lap. Veronica stood near the door, as if proximity to escape might save her. I'll be direct, Jason said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who never needed to shout. 3 weeks ago, Dorothy Mueller saved my life. I was shot, bleeding to death in a Brooklyn alley. She found me, dragged me to her apartment, and nursed me back to health despite having every reason to leave me there or call the police. He paused, letting that sink in. She risked her freedom, her safety, her entire future for a stranger. That creates a debt. Richard Ashford's face had gone gray. Margaret's hand clutched her pearls. 2 days ago, Jason continued, she was fired from your employ, accused of theft, blacklisted, facing deportation. He turned to look directly at Veronica, and she actually flinched. Mrs. Sterling, would you like to explain how a brooch from Mrs. Ashford's bedroom ended up in Dorothy's cleaning supplies? I found it there, Veronica stammered, her voice thin. She must have. Jason reached into his jacket and withdrew a tablet, setting it on the coffee table. He pressed play on a video. Security footage, crystal clear, showing Veronica entering Dorothy's supply closet when no one was watching, unwrapping something from her pocket, and placing it at the bottom of the cleaning caddy. The timestamp was unmistakable, 30 minutes before the discovery. The room went silent except for Veronica's sharp intake of breath. My people obtained this from your own security system, Jason said mildly, along with testimony from 3 former staff members documenting a pattern of similar behavior spanning 7 years. Frame-ups, false accusations, all targeting young women without resources to defend themselves. Bernard opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. Jason turned his attention to the Ashfords. I also have documentation of your business dealings, Richard. The offshore accounts, the tax evasion schemes, the bribes to city inspectors. He let that hang in the air. I have no interest in exposing these things. Unless you fail to cooperate with what happens next. What do you want? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Sterling will be terminated immediately. You will provide Dorothy Mueller with a formal apology and a letter of recommendation so glowing it could light up Manhattan. You will compensate her for lost wages and emotional distress. $50,000 should suffice. Jason's eyes were ice. And Mrs. Sterling will be blacklisted from every household, club, and establishment in New York society. My word carries weight in those circles. By tomorrow morning, she won't be able to get a job cleaning toilets in Newark. Veronica made a sound like a wounded animal. You can't. I can. Jason's voice cut through her protest like a blade. And I will. You prey on the powerless, Mrs. Sterling. You've built your pathetic little kingdom on the backs of women who can't fight back. Consider this your education in consequences. He looked at the Ashfords. Do we have an understanding? Richard nodded, defeated. Margaret did the same. Excellent. Jason straightened his cuffs. My people will be in touch with the details. Mrs. Sterling, you have 1 hour to clear your belongings from this estate. Veronica collapsed into a chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in real time. Jason walked to the door, then paused. Dorothy Mueller saved my life with nothing but kindness and courage. Remember that when you write that letter, Mr. Ashford. She deserves a future. He left without waiting for a response. If you can't stand people like Jason Watkins having all the power, then like this video and show the algorithm you want to see stories of good people rising. Dorothy was packing her few belongings into a cardboard box when the knock came. 3 firm raps, deliberate and controlled. She froze, heart hammering. The eviction notice wasn't due until tomorrow. Had the super changed his mind? Had the police finally come? She opened the door to find Jason Watkins standing in her narrow basement hallway, looking impossibly out of place in his expensive suit against the peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. Hello, Dorothy, he said quietly. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This was the man she'd hidden, fed, healed. The stranger who disappeared like smoke. And now he stood in her doorway like a figure from a fever dream, real and solid and terrifying. May I come in? She stepped aside wordlessly. He entered her tiny apartment, and for a moment she saw it through his eyes. The cracked walls, the bare bulb, the cot, the desperate poverty of it all. Shame burned through her. I owe you an apology, Jason said, turning to face her. For what happened at this state. I should have protected you better. My enemies knew I survived, and they've been searching. I left you vulnerable by being here. You don't owe me anything, Dorothy whispered. I'm just glad you survived. Jason's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's exactly why I owe you everything. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio, thick and official-looking.
Please. Seek.
Dorothy perched on the edge of her cot. Jason sat in her one folding chair, careful and respectful of her space despite its poverty. He opened the portfolio and handed her a document. While I was healing here, I had my people set up something for you. Legal. Legitimate. Untraceable to me. Dorothy's hands shook as she took the papers. The letterhead was from a prestigious law firm. Her name, Dorothy Mueller, was printed at the top in bold letters. Below it, page after page of legal language she could barely understand. Words like beneficiary and irrevocable trust and real estate holdings. What is this? It's yours, Jason said simply. A real estate trust. Apartment buildings in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. Fully managed by a professional firm. The income is substantial, enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. The properties themselves are worth approximately $8 million. The room spun. Dorothy looked up at him, certain she'd misheard. $8 million? The silver ring I left you, Jason continued, watching her carefully. Do you still have it? She nodded, unable to speak, and held up her thumb where the ring still sat. That ring is a key. Not literally, it's embedded with a microchip. It grants access to an account I established for you with initial operating funds. $500,000, also untraceable. He leaned forward, his gray eyes holding hers. You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. You asked for nothing. Expected nothing. This is my debt, Dorothy. And the Phantom always pays his debts. Dorothy looked down at the papers in her trembling hands, at the ring on her thumb, at the impossible gift that would change everything. Tears blurred her vision. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you do this? Jason stood, preparing to leave. Because kindness should never be punished. And because you deserve a future, Dorothy Mueller.
Use it well.
He was gone before she could find words to respond, leaving her alone with a fortune she'd never imagined and a life completely transformed. 6 months later, Dorothy Mueller stood in the sunlit living room of her apartment in Park Slope, looking out over tree-lined streets where children played and couples walked dogs. The apartment was legal, registered in her name, with high ceilings and original hardwood floors and windows that let in actual daylight. No more basement. No more illegal occupancy. No more fear of the knock on the door that would end everything. She'd left the old life behind piece by piece. The cardboard box of belongings.
The shame.
The constant terror. In their place, she built something she never thought possible. Security.
Dignity. Purpose.
The Dorothy Mueller Foundation officially launched on a cold December morning in a modest office space in downtown Brooklyn. The mission was simple: provide legal assistance, job training, and housing support to undocumented women working in domestic service. Women like she had been. Women who lived in basements and cleaned other people's houses and feared every siren, every unexpected visitor, every month's rent. The foundation was funded by a portion of the trust's income, enough to help dozens of women each year without ever touching the principal. Dorothy hired immigration lawyers, job counselors, and social workers. She partnered with legitimate employment agencies and affordable housing nonprofits. She created a pipeline from fear to freedom, all because someone had once seen her humanity when she had nothing else to offer.
New York City noticed.
The story spread through whispered conversations in Upper East Side drawing rooms and Brooklyn community centers alike. A poor maid, fired unjustly, who'd somehow emerged as a philanthropist. No one knew the full truth. The media reported only that an anonymous benefactor had established the trust, that Dorothy Mueller had been the victim of workplace injustice that was privately resolved, that she now dedicated her life to helping others. But in certain circles, among people who understood how power really worked in New York, the truth was whispered like a legend. The Phantom had paid a debt. A life saved in a storm. A gift that defied comprehension. Justice delivered with surgical precision. Veronica Sterling's name disappeared from society entirely, reduced to cautionary tale status among domestic workers, the tyrant who'd picked the wrong target. The Ashfords quietly sold their estate and relocated to Connecticut, their reputation never quite recovering from the scandal of that Maid situation. And Dorothy Mueller, who'd once scrubbed floors with bleeding hands and lived in constant fear, became something she'd never imagined, a woman with power who chose to use it for good. On quiet nights, she'd turn the silver ring on her finger. She wore it always now, moved from her thumb to a chain around her neck, and think about the man who'd given her this impossible gift. She never saw Jason Watkins again. He remained a phantom in truth, a presence felt but never seen. But his legacy lived in every woman the Foundation helped, in every legal status secured, in every future rebuilt from ashes. One act of kindness in a storm had become a movement. One debt paid had transformed hundreds of lives. And Dorothy Mueller, the poor maid who'd saved a dying man because it was the right thing to do, discovered that sometimes the universe keeps its own accounting. That kindness, no matter how small or secret, creates ripples that spread farther than fear ever could. The Phantom's debt was paid, but Dorothy's legacy was just beginning. Comment The Phantom's debt if you believe that true kindness will always be rewarded, no matter who the benefactor is. Share this story to spread the message.